exactly.
Pretty weird. I do have one friend who, hi, Steve.
Hey, Liz, how you doing? Dr.
Good. How are you?
Kaufman?
Hi, Steve. Please call
Hi.
me Andy.
Okay,
Nice to meet you.
you too.
I do have one.
James.
Hi, James.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for being here.
I do have
So
one real life human who I actually know who is now sick with something in his lungs. He can't breathe, and he's just gone to the emergency room in New York. Not in New York, he's just outside the city. They're actually in Connecticut, but in that area that's supposed to be a hotbed. So I still don't know what's happening with him because this just happened last night, but there's this one real life human who's sick with a breathing difficulty.
Well, we had that. I had some people over the weekend before last, and one of them got a call from his sister that his sister's husband also had the same thing, that he was cyanotic and like turning blue and breathing difficulties. And so we were all like thinking, oh, well, later we heard that he tested positive for the flu.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope he's okay.
No, he's totally fine.
Yeah.
He's totally fine now. But
can I tell one more story?
Sure. Hey, okay. Rich.
Hi, Richie from Boston. Nice to meet you.
What's up? I got my microphone off so it doesn't bounce back as I'm recording this. So
thanks for being here, Richie. Appreciate it.
No worries, guys.
So that same friend who's a nurse in Canada, she has been sick recently, very, very sick suddenly, and very strange illness. And I also had this similar illness in November. And so we're wondering if could be this thing. I don't know what it is. Anyway, she's, getting better. And then all of a sudden she's going for a walk and she's realizing she's suddenly getting sick again. She's been, continuously, progressively getting better and better. But all of a sudden on this walk, she's getting sicker and sicker. And all of a sudden she's coughing and coughing and coughing again. She coughs up nothing but clear. There's no infectious looking material coming out like yellow or brown or what we're told is, viral or whatever it is. But it's just clear, but she's coughing, and then she throws up. And then she realizes there's a 5G tower nearby.
Wow. Quite interesting.
There's also that little piece of an actual human who has actual experience with something that's going on. Who knows what.
All right.
There's one more person, but Andy, I want to just go ahead and encourage you to go ahead and start. I think it's Ben, and Ben knows how to get a hold of you anyway. So
okay.
If he misses something, it'll be there. And I just want to quickly say thank you all so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this, and thank you for your time and presence. It means a lot. And I'm going to hand it over to Andy.
Great. Yeah, I really want to echo that. I mean, having you guys help me refine this, for a regular lay type audience is going to be very, very useful. So I really appreciate you spending the time. And let me just tell you how I'd like to run this. So you're all welcome to record the presentation. I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation. It's going to take about a half hour. And you are all free to either independently or in any type of collaboration to edit the film to fit your platform or whatever you'd like to do with it. You can add material. Just request that you let me take a look at it before you post it anywhere, and I'll do that quickly because I would like to get this material out, as soon as possible. And I'm sure that you all do a great job with however you want to work it. So after I give the presentation, then what we'll do is we'll have an opportunity for everyone to ask questions so that we can iron out, any of the issues. So, if you might want to take notes or whatever you need to do to remember what issues you'd like me to clarify. James, do you want to be like the sort of moderator with the questions at the end, or should we have like an order that we choose that people go in, or?
I get the feeling with this group, it's just going to flow. If there's a problem,
okay.
But it's going to be great. Yep. I'm going to, we're already winning. So yeah, just go for it, Andy.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen here and get the PowerPoint up. All right. You guys all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, great. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Dr. Andy Kaufman. I've been talking a lot lately about this viral pandemic. And I've learned some things lately that have helped me develop a theory, and I think I know what is really going on here. So I want to give that information to everyone. I want everyone to know that I am a qualified medical doctor. So I put up some information about my background here. I'm board certified. I practice in psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. I also do natural healing consultation. In the past, I've worked in hematology and oncology. I've held leadership positions in medical school. I ran a medical device startup company. And you can see where I had my education. So I feel that I am qualified to talk about this subject matter, and I hope you'll agree. I just want to thank some people out there who have been really instrumental and inspiring to me. So first of all, Dr. Cowan, who has been outspoken as well on this issue, and he really inspired me and gave me some great ideas that helped me put this whole big picture together. I want to especially thank James True, who has been a great friend, confidant, and collaborator throughout this whole thing, and we're definitely going to do a lot more work together down the road. I really want to thank Richie from Boston, Jason Lindgren, and Crow 777 for giving me the opportunity to get my message out there and for being so supportive and open. It's really just been incredible that I've been able to pursue this mission. I want to thank my kids who have been ignored a lot lately since I've been working so hard trying to figure things out. And I'm so proud of them. They're the only children in my area who I know who are not afraid of getting sick, and they're out playing and having a good time. And then lastly, Dr. Lanka and Dr. Turner Banks, who have done just amazing research and scholarship and have written books and papers that have really helped me figure things out. So thank you to everyone. All right, let's jump right in. So I want to start at the beginning at Ground Zero, Wuhan, China, Hubei province. This is the seafood market there. It's an open air market where the first cases occurred. And as you can see from this picture, there's a bunch of meat and animal carcasses just laid out right on the ground. Here's another photograph from the market where you can see that conditions are somewhat less than sanitary. You have live animals, you have dead animals, you have cut up body parts and fluids that all seem to be cross-contaminating. So this is definitely not the kind of market where I'd be wanting to buy my food from, but certainly there was a lot of traffic there, a very big market. So if what we had is a situation where just about 200 people at first became ill with a mysterious pneumonia type illness at this seafood market, and many of the people were actually employed or made their livelihood at the market. So I want to ask the audience out there, if you learned about this information, what would be your first thought about what most likely might be the problem that caused this mysterious illness? So would it be A, a new genetic disease like cystic fibrosis? Would it be B, a new virus, a new viral illness? Would it be C, autoimmune disease where the body is attacking itself, causing the problem? Or would it simply be bad seafood? And I think most of you would agree that the first thought you would have, given the commonality of the market and the sanitary conditions there, is that bad seafood would be an issue and something certainly to look into. However, the scientists in China did not agree. And in fact, they did not look into this issue at all, as far as I can tell. But instead, they jumped right into the possibility of a virus. So this is a quote from the first paper from the group there that claims to have identified this new coronavirus. And what they said is the disease was determined as viral induced pneumonia by clinicians according to clinical symptoms, including basically a fever, low white blood cell count. Pulmonary infiltrates just means fluid and congestion in the lungs on a chest x-ray. And the people did not get better after 3 days of antibiotics. So they did think of a bacterial infection first and then went right to the virus. And they note that most of the early cases had contact with the seafood market. So it sounds like they were primed to blame a virus on this illness right away. So how did they actually claim to have proved that a virus caused this illness. So what they did is they took only seven out of the almost 200 initial patients who were sick, and they stuck basically a fiber optic camera, like a long tube, down their windpipe into their lungs, and then they squirted a bunch of fluid in there and mixed it around, and it collected whatever debris or cells or chemicals were in the lungs, and then they sucked it back up. And they did take some other body fluids. They did take blood. They took oral swabs and nasal swabs, but it's the lung fluid where they really found think they found what they were looking for. So when they took this lung fluid out, they did not first try to find a virus in there and separate it out and purify it. But the first thing they did was find and separate some kind of genetic material. Quite an interesting strategy. And what they found was some RNA. But I'll tell you that in our bodies, at any given time, there is some free genetic material circulating around our blood and body fluids. And in addition to that, there are genetic material contained in various types of structures. So there's various types of vesicles, essentially just small little sacs of fluids that sometimes contain genetic material. There's also the normal bacteria that live in our body, including in the lungs, and they have genetic material. So there are quite a number of different sources of genetic material. So when they found this genetic material from the lung fluid, they then determined the sequence of it, which is basically the code of the genetic material. So they determined all of the base pairs and the order of that sequence. And then they rushed to rapidly develop a diagnostic test, which is a qualitative PCR, and I'll discuss that a little bit more in a moment. So in other words, before they really proved anything, they already developed a test. Okay, so why didn't they purify the virus, and how do they know what the source is of that genetic material? So it turns out that I was looking in a related area, and I found this study from last summer. And this study was trying to also develop a diagnostic test, but for lung cancer. And essentially, they used the same exact procedure. So they got the lung fluid in the same way with that bronchoalveolar lavage, and they collected that fluid. And out of that fluid, they isolated genetic material, and they sequenced that and they called it a possible biomarker, and this could be a test for lung cancer. So I thought it was quite interesting and coincidental that the same exact procedure was developing a diagnostic test for lung cancer as was developing a diagnostic test for this pandemic pneumonia. So let's look a little bit more in detail at this test. So this is that RT-PCR stands for, it's a mouthful, but it's reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. And the RT part refers to that we're using it to amplify RNA rather than DNA. If we were using it to amplify DNA, it would just be called PCR. Okay, now I'll tell you some important things about this test. So the most important thing is it's not actually testing for the virus itself, it's testing for a sequence of RNA. Now, that sequence of RNA may be present in a virus, but it also may be present in other things. And so I'll give you an example, and I think I mentioned this before, but let's say we had a person that we wanted to identify. Okay, so James, I'm going to use you this time. So we want to be able to identify James out of a crowd, and we're going to send him to Yankee Stadium to a baseball game. But we're not going to look for James's face or any other part of his actual body. Instead, we're going to use a surrogate marker just like they're using for this test. So we're going to put a cap on James's head. And now we're not going to use the typical navy blue Yankees hat because there are going to be a million people with that, right? So we got a unique Yankees hat with pinstripes on it. So it's white with blue pinstripes. And we're going to have him put that hat on and then go into the stadium and disperse amongst the crowd. And then we have a team of 10 people that we're going to send out into the stadium looking for that hat. Okay, so we do this procedure, and lo and behold, what happens is we actually find 6 of these hats. Okay, so 6 out of 10 people find someone wearing this hat. So we go and identify if any of those people are James. And it actually turns out that none of them are James, because James doesn't like wearing hats. So once he got in the stadium, he gave his hat to some kid who would have liked it, and that was one of the 6 people that we found. So you see that when you are looking for something that's not exactly the thing you're looking for, but it's something that's associated with that thing, you have to really understand the relationship between what you're looking for and that thing. So in other words, we had to ask James, will you be comfortable wearing this hat the whole time, right? And then we also have to know, did other people buy this hat, or is this a one-of-a-kind hat, right? So you can see it can be very misleading. We can get a lot of false results by using this type of method. So in order to mitigate that, and by the way, this concept was just drilled into us in medical school, that whenever you're evaluating a new test, that you need to compare it to the gold standard. And that's how you know if it's actually valid. So with this COVID-19 test, there has not been any gold standard test that this has been compared to, because the supposed COVID-19 virus has never been purified and visualized. So in other words, if we were able to take people who are ill with this pandemic pneumonia and take their lung fluid, and from that purify out a virus particle that we could identify, and once we purified that, we could actually take the genetic material right from that particle, so we know that it came where it came from. We know it didn't come from anywhere else, because now we have a pure sample of only these particles. Then we would be able to have a gold standard. And so the way you would test this PCR is you would have a group of sick patients, and then you would have a control group of healthy patients. You would perform the gold standard test, so you'd be able to identify the virus out of each of those patients. And then you would compare the results of the PCR test to that gold standard. And that is really critical, because it would allow you to determine or calculate an error rate, because no test is perfect. It's also very, very important that you have that control group, because that control group would not have the virus present at all, and should have a negative PCR test. And that's very important in order to help you calculate these error rates. So one example of a type of error that I think we'd be very concerned about with this test, because we don't want to be mislabeled as being positive for this alleged virus and then risk being quarantined or perhaps even detained. So, we want to know the accuracy. Now, there was a paper that came out where they had to estimate the false positive rate, because you can't calculate it since there's no gold standard to compare it against. And they actually reported an estimated rate of 80% in people without symptoms. So what that means is, if you got tested, let's say you were exposed to somebody who tested positive, or you traveled or something like that, and you want to get tested, or you're asked to get tested, there would be 4 out of 5 times that there was a positive result, there would actually be no illness. So this could be a real big problem. It certainly could vastly overestimate the number of cases, and also could have a lot of consequences for you based on this quarantine situation. So just to talk generally about what the PCR test, because there's actually additional error even beyond what I've described. So what this test does is it's really just an amplification strategy. And the reason this is necessary is because we're kind of looking for a needle in a haystack. We might only find a few copies of this genetic material. And if there's only a few copies, we just can't detect it out of all of the other stuff that's in the fluid. So what this does is it's a reaction that actually replicates the strand of RNA, and it makes a copy. So it makes from 1 to 2. So you would run a cycle of this reaction, and you'd go from, say, 1 copy to 2 copies. Then you would stop the reaction and then start another cycle by adding some more materials, and then you go from 2 to 4 and repeat it again, 4 to 8, and so on and so on. And this is an exponential or a binomial expansion. And if you look at the black curve on the graph here, you'll see that's what that represents. So Generally speaking, when you're using this test, you want to carry out approximately between 25 and 35 cycles in order to get enough amplification that you can see what you're looking for. If you go too much beyond that, what happens is you end up amplifying the noise. So it seems to be generally represented that the absolute maximum number of cycles that you could do and still get an accurate result is 45. And that's exactly the number of cycles that is recommended for this COVID-19 PCR test. So it's right at the upper limit. And I'm going to share this quote with you from another article about PCR. It says, what PCR does is to select a genetic sequence and then amplify it enormously. It can accomplish the equivalent of finding a needle in a haystack. It can amplify that needle into a haystack. Like an electronically amplified antenna, PCR greatly amplifies the signal, but also greatly amplifies the noise. Since the amplification is exponential, the slightest error in measurement, the slightest contamination, can result in errors of many orders of magnitude. So this is not a very accurate test, especially when you're pushing the number of cycles to get so much amplification. Just a slight mistake can result in false positives. And I think that's what we've been seeing. So I'm going to change gears now a little bit and talk about something different, something that most of you have never heard of whatsoever, and it's called exosomes. And I'm going to talk about what they are and why they're relevant for this discussion. So exosomes are something that is naturally occurring in the body. So I have this diagram here, and if you look at the top right of the diagram, you'll see that this is a normal cell here outlined, and inside the cell you have these vesicles. And inside of our cells there are a number of different little organs, they call them organelles, and they're generally contained by a membrane. They come in different shapes, but lots of them are in this structure. It's essentially like a spherical blob that has the same membrane as is the outer membrane of the cell, a lipid bilayer membrane, and it can contain various types of chemicals. Now, this is a specific type of vesicle that will end up merging with the cell membrane at the surface under certain conditions and release these exosomes out into the extracellular fluid, and they'll get into the circulation and be distributed around the body. So while they're inside the cell, they're called MVEs, which stands for multivesicular endosomes. So in other words, they have a bunch of exosomes or vesicles inside them. And they release these on a regular basis, just day to day. And there are many things, though, that can induce this process and accelerate it and increase the number of exosomes that it releases outside of the cell. And so these exosomes leave the cell, and you see they have these little squares on them. And these little squares are like a lock. And what they do is they go around the body through the circulation, and they're looking for the right key to fit their lock. And that's called the target cell. And depending on what kind of cell releases them, they might have different keys and different locks, so they're targeted to different parts of the body. And these are mostly thought to involve communication. So communication between one cell and another cell, between one part of the body and another part of the body. And they can have many functions in this communication, which I'll get to momentarily. So here on the left, this is an electron micrograph, or a picture from an electron microscope of exosomes. And you can see here an exosome budding out of the cell. And it's essentially a spherical or circular, this is a cross section, so this is like a slice of the tissue, where on the periphery there are like these kind of globular densities or little dots or circles, right? And inside the cell here where it says MVB, sorry, these are the same as MVEs, that's where all these exosomes are when they're inside the cell before they bud out, okay? And now we have a picture on the right which allegedly shows this COVID-19 virus. And you can see that there are these vesicles budding out of the cell in a circular shape with these globular dots on the periphery. So essentially, it's the same thing. Now, you might think that this looks a little bit fuzzier on the exosomes and it looks a bit sharper in this picture. And I want to tell you that the reason for that is because when you're cutting these thin sections of tissue to make these slides, you're using this device called a microtome. It's like a vibrating razor blade. And it's technically difficult. And sometimes the tissue doesn't cooperate well, or sometimes the person is less skilled, and you might not have a perfect slice. On this COVID-19 slide, this is, I've not seen a better slice than this. It's absolutely perfect. The one on the left is a little bit thicker. And so that's why it looks a bit fuzzier and less sharp, but essentially you're seeing the same exact thing. And I want to take a look at the same comparison when we see both of them inside of the host cell. Okay, so on the bottom left here, this is a COVID-19 cell. And you see right here is supposedly this is the virus particle inside the cell. And once again, you see a circular shape. And inside, you see these round globular aggregates. Okay, now look at the top right. And this here is showing you this is less magnification, and this is actually a nerve cell. And this is the MVE. So these are a bunch of exosomes inside here. And you see a circular structure filled with these globular particles. So once again, same thing, also same size, both about 500 nanometers in diameter. Okay, you see the scale lines here, so you can see for yourself. So now we have a series of 2 comparison photographs under electron microscope of the virus and an exosome outside the cell, and a virus and an MVE inside the cell, and you can see that they are identical in appearance. So let's look at actually some physical parameters of these and continue our comparison. So I've mentioned a little bit that they are roughly the same size when they're inside the cell, same size when they're outside the cell. Now there is some variability here. I've looked at lots of these photographs, and I see in both cases there is some variability in the size. So these numbers are not precise, but in every case they are essentially compatible in their range of sizes. Now also the receptor, now this is a key thing. Now remember I mentioned that lock and key mechanism. Well, actually with the COVID-19 papers, they have discovered that on its surface it has a receptor for ACE2. Now ACE2 is an angiotensin converting enzyme. It's an enzyme in our bodies. One of its functions is that it works with the kidney to regulate blood pressure, and there are blood pressure medications that inhibit this enzyme. But in this paper, what they said is that this receptor is actually how the virus invades the cells. Now, I also was able to find a paper where they've identified exosomes coming from our own body that also use the ACE2 receptor as their lock and key mechanism to find their target cells. So exosomes and COVID-19, the same exact receptor on their surface targeting the same exact cells. Now, these both contain genetic material, and it's both in the form of RNA. No DNA, only RNA. And these structures are both found in the lung fluid. So the lung cancer test that I showed you earlier found exosomes in that fluid, and the lung fluid showed the COVID-19 as well. So you can see that the more we take out this comparison forward, we see that they're essentially the same in every important way. So I happen to be looking in the virology literature, and actually they also think exosomes and viruses are possibly the same thing. So this is Dr. James Hildreth, a very prominent researcher and academic physician in the field of virology and HIV research. He's currently the president and CEO of Meharry Medical College, but he was a full professor at Johns Hopkins, and he wrote this paper with 2 of his colleagues there. And what he said, and I quote, "The virus is fully an exosome in every sense of the word." Now, this was just a great confirmation for what I was already thinking, and I was kind of blown away when I read this in the paper, because this was one of the last papers I looked at to find this after I'd already come to the same conclusion. It really helped validate my opinion. So what is it that causes us to make more of these exosomes and throw them out into our circulation? So it turns out that almost every type of insult to the body would actually cause this process to occur. So toxic substances, and I found several papers looking at this. Some of them looked at environmental toxins, such as heavy metals like arsenic, and organic chemical toxins. Also found evidence about bacterial toxins, and I have a slide that I'll show you in a minute. So there's clearly has a role in the communication or possibly removal of toxic substances that damage our cells. Now, interestingly, psychological stress, including fear, which many, many people around the world are experiencing in a very intense way right now, also causes release of exosomes. So you see how this may cause false positive tests. Cancer, as I mentioned before, lung cancer has many exosomes. Ionizing radiation, infection, injury, in fact, any type of immune response, so whether it be to injury, infection, or another disease, asthma. Now, many papers just said that exosomes are induced by disease, and they didn't mention anything specific, and they seem to be implying that virtually any type of disease can cause this process. Now, I really wanted to find evidence that EMF would induce exosomes, but unfortunately I could not find a paper on this. But I want to say to all of the people in this field of research on exosomes that this would be an excellent contribution to the literature if you were to look at this issue, if various, especially microwave radiation like 5G, would cause this as well. So I want to talk about the second paper, because this is going to help us merge these two ideas of a virus and an exosome, and are they the same thing? So this is also from the group in China. This one is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they had a slightly different protocol, but essentially it was very similar. So what they did is, once again, they did that procedure to get the lung fluid, and then they centrifuged it and just took the fluid. So any cells from the host, like any lung cells that might be in there, or bacterial cells, would be stuck in a pellet in the bottom of the test tube, and they just took the fluid off the top, assuming that if there were viral particles, they'd be in that fluid. But they didn't actually then try to purify the virus out of that fluid. Instead, they mixed it with cells that they took from a person who had lung cancer surgery, and they incubated it with the lung cancer cells. Now, you remember I said earlier, and I showed experimental evidence, that lung cancer cells make exosomes. So when they then purified particles after incubating this fluid with the lung cancer cells and then examined them under the microscope, well, were they looking at viral particles, or were they looking at exosomes? And I have two images below, and one is supposedly the viral particle from this paper, and the other is an exosome. Can you tell the difference? Here is another slide showing the functions of exosomes as they can remove toxins. So in the upper right here, these green cells are actually bacteria. And by the way, this image, all electron micrograph images are always in black and white. If you see an image like this has been colorized after the fact, and they did that to help you identify what is what. So I think this is actually quite a nice approach, and this is a real slide. It's very different from some of the slides that you've seen that are just computer graphics that are made by an artist. So these particles that they colored purple are the toxins released by the bacteria, and if they were allowed to contact the cell membrane, they would actually bore little holes in there, and the cell's contents would leak out and it would die. So what's happening is that the cell put out these yellow exosomes once it realized these toxins were there, and you see they're all budding out of the central area of the cell, and you can see they're basically swallowing up the little toxin particles. And so in this experiment, what they actually did is that they found that when they mixed cells with the bacteria, if the cells put out the exosomes that ate up the toxins, then the cells survived. If the cells were mixed with the bacteria and they did not put out the exosomes, then the cells died. So this was done, in a petri dish, not in a person, but so we can't say for sure, but what this is really telling us is that these exosomes help us clear these toxins so that they don't damage our tissue. So a very important function. I also wanted to take a quick look because there have been some recent reports that people who have been ill are having rapid recoveries with a couple of non-traditional treatments. Like, these are not things that would typically be thought of by the medical establishment to use for a quote-unquote viral illness. But there are certainly reports. There was a doctor in New York City who claimed that he cured several hundred patients with hydroxychloroquine. I think he combined it with zinc. Now, hydroxychloroquine was originally a drug for malaria, but it's used in the United States primarily for diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. And it is not known how it works in those illnesses. And in my experience, it doesn't really work at all in those illnesses. However, there has been a bunch of research trying to figure out what this drug does. And I read a review paper on this, and I found quite an interesting thing. So there are studies that show that this drug can release lysosomal enzymes. So I'll tell you that the lysosome is basically the garbage dump of the cell. So it's another one of these vesicles or sacs, and it has all these enzymes that basically just chew everything up, similar to what happens in your gut when you're digesting food. And any trash that is not working anymore, right, like proteins that have degraded or DNA that was copied in error or things like that, they get sent to the lysosome for destruction and recycling. So it breaks it down into the basic constituents and then is able to send it back to the factory part of the cell where it could be reused to make new molecules. But in the case of this drug, what it actually does is release these enzymes out of the compartment in the cell and into the cell cytoplasm. And this can actually be quite damaging to the cell itself. However, if the cell has been inundated with some kind of toxic substance, these enzymes could help break that down so that the cell could survive. So I think that may be actually how it's helping these patients. Now, vitamin C is the other one that has been reported to be quite successful. And a lot of people think that vitamin C really works by, quote unquote, boosting the immune system. Now, it does have an effect on some of the immune regulatory function, but I do not feel that that's really how it helps in these conditions. In my opinion, it is the antioxidant properties of this drug and possibly the blood thinning qualities that is what really helps this illness. So when you have a toxic exposure, oftentimes that toxin will cause what's known as oxidative stress or free radicals. And we're all familiar with, that it's recommended to take antioxidants and, eat special kinds of berries and things like that. But not too many people understand what that's really doing. But what it does is it kind of acts like a neutralizing sponge for these free radicals. It just soaks them up and quelches them. And what the free radicals do is they have like a chain reaction. It's like they tag someone and make them a free radical and tag the next person and make it a free radical. And then all these molecules end up falling apart and making a huge mess. And the cells can't function. So the vitamin C stops that process dead in its tracks and reduces that damage and prevents further damage. And in my opinion, that's how it works for this type of acute illness. All right, so I'm going to tie this all together, everything I've told you tonight, into what I think is really going on here. So what I think is happening is that, first of all, as I've reported quite a bit, there are really not pandemic levels of people getting sick and dying from whatever's going on. The numbers are far less than a typical flu season. However, there clearly are some people who are getting sick. What I believe is causing this illness is that there is some kind of insult that occurs that causes the damage, and then there is a reaction to it, which is the production of exosomes. And when we are testing for this supposed virus, we are actually testing for these exosomes, which confirms that there's some kind of unhealthy process going on in the body. Now, I talked about the things that can cause production of the exosomes, and I believe that those represent the cause of the illness. And I think that the possibilities are that there is some kind of poison. Certainly, there's lots of precedent for a pneumonia-type illness coming from inhalation of toxic substances. There could be the stress and fear could be the cause. It could represent a regular flu or pneumonia or even a bad cold, and whatever causes those would be the same cause. And lastly, electromagnetic radiation could certainly be a cause as well. There has been a major proliferation and installation of new 5G infrastructure. And there's certainly evidence known that 5G can have adverse effects on one's health, including damaging DNA. And that evidence actually comes from Los Alamos National Laboratories when they've studied microwave and radiation like they use in the body scanners in the airport. And I think it's quite possible that there is not one toxic exposure, but there could be different causes of this illness in different areas, or perhaps even in the same area between different people, that this may not be a uniform cause of the illness, but it does cause a similar constellation of upper respiratory symptoms. And these symptoms are not extremely specific. All of these illnesses, I could list off probably 20 different illnesses that would cause a cough, possible shortness of breath, a fever, and suppress your white count. So there could be several different causes of this, but I do not see any conclusive evidence whatsoever that there is any virus. And certainly you could see that the exosome and the virus are essentially indistinguishable from each other. So let me just reiterate that. So there is some sort of insult or toxin that you're exposed to, it causes illness, and then that stimulates your own cells to induce and produce and put out these exosomes, because they will send the important signal to your body on how to handle this problem. And part of that is they will actually eat up and, like a sponge, soak up these toxins so that they can be safely removed from your body so that you can recover. So what I'm saying is that COVID-19 actually are exosomes and not a virus that invades your body from the outside. It comes from within your body to help you, and it's a reaction to the real cause of illness. And that's where I'm going to end it right now and take questions. And I just want everyone to know that I have a comprehensive list of references for this talk, and this will certainly be published with us, and I will distribute this slide presentation to all of my collaborators.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andy. Is it accurate? I'd like to start with the first question, if that's okay. Is it accurate to say that the day before the Wuhan breakout took place, the day before anyone knew anything was wrong, if you were to send a team into that place, that we would find exosomes inside of every single human there at that location?
Absolutely.
And if we were to do that to the most healthy city in the world that we could find, if we were to go into that place and go into the clean mall where everyone washes their hands, would we find exosomes inside of the bodies of all of those people too? Or a majority of them, let's say?
Yeah, well, so if you looked hard enough, you would find exosomes in every single human being. But in order to make it easier to find, you would have to have a certain level that would be a little bit easier to detect. Okay, because remember I talked about that amplification process. And so if something is really at a super low level, it's harder to amplify. So, but the thing is that you don't have to actually be acutely ill to have an excess of exosomes, because let's say that you're a pretty healthy person, but you decide that you want to treat yourself and you go to a fast food restaurant. And there's a bunch of chemicals and toxins in that fast food restaurant. Well, that is going to cause induction of exosome release. Okay, so just because of that, you're going to now have a higher number, even though you're not acutely ill, and it'd be more likely to be able to be detected on a test. And I would say also, if you had some strong emotional things going on, you may not be physically ill, but you may be in a crisis. You may be experiencing grief or anxiety, or as people are now, fear. And that will also cause an increase in the exosomes, and it'll be much more likely to be detected on a certain type of test.
Fantastic. To follow up on that, if I can, you mentioned the RNA, and as a layman, I'm purposely asking this so you'll correct me, for whatever I'm wrong on. The cell is copying DNA. To copy it, it makes RNA. And during that copying procedure, it's much like an MP3 file in the sense that it's copying as fast as it can. And there's going to be errors that crop up during that copying process, and that those errors could easily trigger, maybe, I don't know if it's easily, but those errors could then trigger that same blue and white striped ball cap. Say it could be found on the awning over the bathroom, or on a lady's purse. She could be having a blue and white striped purse, for example. Is that accurate, or am I off there?
Yeah, no. You're very on the money with looking at this, and there's several things to consider about that. Would you mind just repeating that question again, because I just lost my train of thought? Just the beginning part.
The beginning part mainly was during the cell is copying DNA.
Yes, I remember now. It's about the errors. Yeah. So what I wanted to say was that, so we all know about DNA, right? Everybody, even if you don't know how biology works, you know that we have DNA, and you know that we have genes, and it codes some kind of blueprint for how our body's supposed to work, right? So the DNA is mostly just to like store the code. But when we actually express the genes, what happens is that the DNA, it's called transcription, it gets transcribed and forms RNA. And RNA is a bit easier to work with for certain functions because it's generally in a single strand. So when you work with the DNA, even when the DNA makes the RNA, like part of it has to separate from the two strands that are in a helix, open it up so that the enzymes can attach to it to make the RNA. But once you have the RNA, it's much easier because it's just a single strand, so it can then go on, and what happens is it actually codes proteins and makes proteins. Whenever you have either replication of DNA, like DNA making more DNA, like when cells divide, or when you have DNA making RNA, there's always errors that are going to occur. So these errors are just a normal process, because think about it, we're human, we make mistakes, right? We can't ever stop making mistakes. We're always going to make them. And the cells are the same way, and the chemistry is the same way, because we're talking about in our DNA in a human, there are 3 billion base pairs. So in other words, the code is 3 billion symbols long. Okay, so that's a lot of mileage. So of course there are going to be errors in there. And in fact, we have a whole set of machinery in our cells to help catch those errors and correct those errors so that they don't perpetuate and cause us disease and dysfunction. And also, when we're exposed to stress or toxic material or radiation, it can increase the error rate, because those things can affect the chemistry of the replication, and they affect the structure of the water. I mean, water is a really important aspect of this, because the DNA itself, for example, when the water is structured, there's a column of DNA of water that runs inside the helix and is critical for it functioning proper in a chemical way. So if we have some kind of toxin or stress or radiation that disrupts the structure of the water, it can actually perpetuate more errors when there's replication and transcription to make RNA. So that's a really good point. Now, the other point I want to mention is also related to the test being wrong. So when they do this PCR test, they're actually using a probe, which is only a short stretch of the sequence they're looking for, that will attach to the genetic material that you want to find and basically be like the start of adding more bases on and duplicating the sequence exactly. And that probe, so basically the probe is the only thing that will match up with what you're looking for. And some of the probes used in the COVID-19 are only like 20 to 26 base pairs long. So if you think about it, if we have a stretch of 3 billion base pairs, right? I think that somewhere in there, you're going to find every single combination of 26 base pairs. So you're gonna, I mean, it's impossible not to be there. So it would be easy to say that you think this sequence is specific to some virus that you think you found, but it could very well just as easily be a piece of our own DNA that has the same exact sequence.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy is what it sounds like to me.
Yes, that's certainly one way to look at it.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? Please speak up.
I have 4 questions. So my first question is, when you say the 45 cycles is the sort of upper limit that's going to start to give you results that aren't necessarily indicative of anything, does that add to the 80% likelihood of false positives, or is that part of the 80% false positives?
Right. Well, I don't think that the team that did that estimation really took into account the method of the PCR when they did that rate. What they were trying to look at is people that tested positive, they could follow them out and see if they got sick. But so I look at it as a separate source of error. Now, certainly it would, if you could accurately measure the error rate, if you had a gold standard comparison, it would be reflected in whatever error rate you calculated, right? But since we only have an estimate and it didn't account for it directly, it could be considered as an additional source of error. But it's really, really difficult to know what the magnitude of that is because we have no comparison. And then we also have a situation where there are different protocols that are run in different laboratories in different countries. So I found a protocol from the World Health Organization that is described 45 cycles. But that doesn't mean that if you go to Taiwan or if you go to Sweden or if you go to Mexico, that they're doing it exactly the same way. It's the same thing with the probes. They list, I think, 7 different probes that you can use. And so you have some choices there as to how you go, and it's just going to be like heterogeneous. And I think a really good example of comparison is the HIV test, which is also quite problematic and has many, over 50 conditions that cause a false positive, including pregnancy. Wow. And so they've done a test where they have one person who has already been documented to be HIV positive, and they take their samples and send it out to like 10 different laboratories and see, do those results agree? And what they find is that they do not agree, that they are sometimes negative, sometimes positive. And they've even done this where they've repeated it over time. So they have that person do it one time, then 6 months later, say, they take samples and send it out again. And even within the lab with the same sample, the result is not consistent over time. So in other words, you take my blood and test it now and it's negative, or it's positive, and then test it in 6 months, it's negative. The same blood sample, same person, right? And I didn't do anything different. So it's impossible to tell right now how much of this error is going on because there's so much panic and urgency to everything. And there's certain things like it's really hard to find information about this test, actually.
Okay, thank you. And there's a couple of the pictures of the exosomes and the virus, and the size, the scale is different. But that you were saying they are actually the same size. It's just the scale is reported in different units, I guess.
Yes, that's
Okay.
it. So there was one where there's it's reported in one is 500 nanometers, and the other one it's 5 micrometers.
Okay.
Those are actually it's the same exact length. Yeah, they try to make it as confusing as possible by not
course.
using standards. So I had a scientific calculator that I was using quite a bit in to prepare this lecture.
But yeah, because I don't know those units, so that's good to know. And then, what would you say to people who are saying then this seems transmissible? Are exosomes transmissible, or is this, how would that be happening if it's not sort of our traditional understanding of a virus?
Right. Well, I don't think this is really known. So certainly there are exosomes in our body fluids, right? And if they're in the lung fluid, then when you cough, they're coming out of your body, right? So there is some possibility of this. However, think about the function of the exosomes. The exosomes provide a helpful function. They signal to other parts of your body that there's danger and how to deal with it, right? Or they actually even eat up those toxins. Mm-hmm. So if they were transmitted between people, it could actually perform a symbiotic type of function, a beneficial function, that it could help prepare other people that you might face the same toxic exposure. So you should prepare yourself for that. Now, that has not been, there's no studies that I found that show that. So this is purely my reasoning based on what I do know. I can't say for sure. But I do want to say one other thing about that given the size of these particles, that they are so tiny, there's really no way that you can prevent them from getting out or getting in. Right? So, if you look at the pores of the masks people are wearing, they're way bigger than the size of these particles. Yeah. So they're essentially just going to go right through.
So, yeah, because I just was watching something where the professor was describing it as like if you, saw a group of dolphins getting sick, and would you go just pick one dolphin and start cutting it up and looking for things? Or would you say like, wow, there's probably something in the water. Let's test the water and find out what's in the water. And so that's kind of similar to this, is maybe it's not transmitting, maybe there's a whole section of our world that's got a certain toxin and we're responding to it accordingly. But last question, wasn't 5G deployed in Wuhan just before all of this started affecting people?
Yes, I believe it was.
Okay.
And, I know that there is a lot of speculation and a lot of people actually with very strong opinions that feeling that 5G is the principal insult that has caused people to be sick. Now, I don't want to say, I think that this is a real possibility, and certainly there is a lot of correlations like that there's an installation and then there's an illness, and I think in Italy you can also find a similar pattern. But I think it's important to know that correlation does not prove causation. Right. And that there's really not quite enough evidence right now to say that with any conclusive opinion on it. But I definitely think that it merits a lot more investigation. And, I am very concerned about this deployment of 5G, that even if it's not the cause of this problem, it's going to be the cause of a lot of problems in the future.
Agreed. That was my last question.
Well, I would also, correct me if I'm wrong, sorry to jump ahead here, but this is a proof that your immune system is doing its job, right? Like if you test positive for exosomes, that's like, yeah, your system is working. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I don't think it proves that your immune system is working, but it definitely proves that your body is reacting to something and trying to function to heal from whatever that insult is. And interestingly, there have been, so remember I talked about that lock and key mechanism. So there have been other studies of exosomes showing that they have the lock for certain immune cells. And they are strongly felt to actually play a role in helping the immune system fix some of these problems. So that's an excellent point, James.
So it sounds like that you've isolated what it is not, but do we have an idea what it is and what they're supposedly these people are experiencing?
You mean what is the real cause of the illness?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's really, really difficult to say because there aren't really any scientists doing any research experiments looking for another cause. I will point out some interesting things that I heard in addition to the 5G hypothesis, but from Dr. Cowan, who Lindsay, by the way, he's the one that made that dolphin analogy.
Yeah, cool.
And he was really helped me think about this in this big picture way. But so he mentioned that there was a community, and I think this might be in Northern Africa, but I could definitely be wrong. It was definitely in a developing country where they had just recently made people use biodiesel for all of the vehicles, or they rolled out a big fleet of vehicles using biodiesel. And so he was reasoning that probably, this is like from corn or other GMO crops making this diesel, so that when these vehicles are using this fuel, they're actually putting out tons of glyphosate into the air. And then people would be inhaling this possibly, and then that could be a cause in that area of a respiratory illness. So it's quite possible that it could be multiple different causes in different places, and which also would help account for a slightly different constellation of symptoms that might be segregated in certain areas geographically.
So is this really nothing beyond a flu per se? Like the things that we're seeing, is this just a flu and they're saying it's this other thing? They're just taking all of the flu things that are going on all over the world and saying, oh, it's this one terrible thing and we have to stop it.
Right. Well, that is certainly a possibility. And, that has been my main working hypothesis so far, because if you look at the number of cases and the number of fatalities, you'd see that it doesn't even really rise to the level of the flu. So if they took the real number of flu cases for this year and decided to designate a certain portion of those people to test positive and say that when they're having the flu, it's actually this other really scary virus that is more likely to kill you, and that we need to take all these precautions, that everything could certainly be explained by that, because when you have the flu, you're definitely going to put out these exosomes, and so you can have a positive test. Does that answer your question, Jason, or do you have a follow-up with that?
Well, I'm considering where to go with that. The numbers that we're seeing, it's really not any different than they would be, right? From year to year?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some groups who actually collect statistics on this, and they call it excess mortality. So they generally try to collect this data in real time. Like there's a site called Momo where they do this for Europe. I think there's a site where they do this just for the United Kingdom, and there may be some other data on this where they're looking, okay, right now we're at March 30th. So compared to the last 10-year average from March 30th, are more people dying this year than other years? And they have not really seen an overall signal. If you narrow that down and look at a certain area, you might see that there's excess mortality in one small area and maybe decreased mortality in another. And that's going to happen every year, right? Because there's always going to be variability. But if you look at the overall numbers together, there does not seem to be any evidence of excess mortality as a result of this pandemic.
If we were to put everyone who's tested positive into the same room, isn't it an assumption to say that they all are suffering from the same ailment? Because really what they have in common is that they all share an exosome that looks the same under a microscope with no gold standard, which it just doesn't sound like that's even a diagnosis. It's more of like a way of collecting people together. Hey, everyone that has two shoes, you now have a disease called shoeism.
Yeah, well, many of these tests are like this. I mean, look at the test for Lyme disease, which once again, now that is a bacteria. So, bacteria are much easier to collect and isolate out of a person, but they don't do that. Instead, they look for this shadow, which in that case are antibodies. And it's really quite meaningless. I mean, you can test lots of healthy people and show antibodies, and lots of sick people don't have the antibodies. So this is, seems to be pervasive in the diagnostic testing, and it seems to be really correlated to infectious illnesses or allegedly infectious illnesses. And I think it really obfuscates what is the true cause of illness in most folks.
Andy, do you have any sense at all? This is not a scientific question, but do you have any sense at all of the percentage of doctors and nurses who have understand what an exosome is?
Oh, only the ones who do research would probably even have heard of it. I mean, I think I had heard of it before, but I used to do molecular biology research. But when he mentioned it, it sounded familiar when I heard Dr. Cowan mention it, but I didn't really know exactly what it was. That's why for the past 2 days, I have not slept much, because I've just been reading papers to try and understand and put all this together. So, they would have no idea. And it's beyond that, because actually, I think if you went around and talked to even doctors, the sort of the highest credential of the healthcare system, they wouldn't be able to explain how PCR works or what are the pitfalls of it. They just know, oh yeah, that's a good test. It's easy and it gives me the result I want. But they wouldn't be able to tell you about the amplification of noise and the noise to signal ratio and problems, or how many cycles, or the non-specificity, or anything. Now, they would, if they were evaluating the research, they would at least know that it should be compared to a gold standard. But most likely they're just too busy seeing patients to ever read any articles or investigate this.
Absolutely.
So you just find pervasive ignorance about these matters.
And I only say that to say that, because of their critical care skills, because of they're trying to focus on what they can, they have no choice but to delegate these tests and these understandings to someone else. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is inside of every hospital, like on the average hospital, is there an exosome expert that's like, yeah, give me that slide, I'll do it.
There is no current application of this science of exosomes to medicine at all. It's in a purely research phase, but it's been a really growing area of research, that it seems like the number of papers each year is growing exponentially. And I think, that's related to this overlap with viruses. And I think it's, it's quite likely that in the future that that they may even, the word virus and exosome may be fused.
So I'm sorry to dominate you guys. Just to clarify this, if there's a bottleneck, basically there's a bottleneck of information on this disease, and there's only a few people that even are really looking at it on a purely scientific level, meaning they're not reading someone else's work. They are physically looking themselves,
Right,
and handing down that verdict. And because of that bottleneck, you have no choice but to rely on what you were told from an outside source, and to use that information as best you can on sort of a blind trust sort of situation, almost like a compartmentalization that you might find in, say, a large government body, or the military, or academia, or the medical industry. All these things seem to have this same kind of problem, where there's a bottleneck there, where maybe some information could be lost, or God forbid, even mangled in some way.
absolutely. And well, of course we have to trust the CDC and do what they say, and that's what almost all doctors, how they think. And I'll tell you that the only people reading these papers about how they identify this virus are other researchers that either can make money related to this, like if they develop a vaccine or a test, or just academics in this field who want to be involved. And certainly if you're the author of a COVID-19 paper, I think that's going to give you quite a bit of prestige and credibility in academic circles, because it's such a big deal right now, right? Just like the Bob Gallo became famous for, allegedly discovering the HIV virus. So, but for the average physician, they don't read scientific papers at all, and they are just, concerned about dealing with a crisis. I think many of them now are really perplexed because they're just not seeing the levels of sick and dying people that has been, touted and promised that's coming. And so, I actually think, in this situation, unlike in many other situations, that some of the doctors are actually the most rational about this. Even, doctors who are, like normies who are going along with the party line in every other area are like, oh, this is just a flu. We'll deal with it.
The testing, the way you're describing it, almost seems analogous to a low audio signal that you're trying to hear better. So you throw it into a compressor, try to boost it up, but of course the background noise is coming up with it at the same time. And the harder you hit it, the more you're going to bring up that background noise, almost smearing the entire thing, making it almost difficult to pick out what you want. Is that similar to the idea?
It is beyond similar, Jason. You hit it right on the head there. That's exactly what's going on with this test.
Yeah, and let's not forget that just as an MP3 is not the same MP3, each of us can have 4 different versions of the same MP3 file because of lost compression. So the noise is a beautiful, beautiful dark hole that you can pull rabbits out of at will, depending on which rabbit and how tiny it is that you're looking for it.
That's exactly what I was suspecting.
Black magicians love that trick.
Well, the other thing is when you're using the MP3 analogy, the way an MP3 works is that it's slicing things out. It's dropping things. And the smaller you want the MP3, the more data is lost, which means you have less to work with, the worse, the more you truncate it. And again, this is starting to remind me of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this, these other technology analogies really work for this because it's essentially the same process. We're just, instead of applying it to an electrical application or a data application, we're just applying it to a chemical application.
So looking at this problem as a whole, is there a common denominator between what was going on, say, in Wuhan, China, and what's supposedly going on in New York City? And even what I was told when I went to a hospital last night in New Orleans, one of the biggest Ochners on Jefferson Avenue, and I couldn't even get in the front door. There were 3 people, 3 ladies, nurses, I assumed, in masks. There were cops out front. There were several ambulances with gentlemen in masks, looked like they were just on standby. And I asked as many questions as I could get away with, and they wouldn't tell me numbers or anything like that, but they said that all of the COVID patients are being completely isolated from everyone else. If, for instance, you needed to go to the ER, you would immediately have to wear a mask and go in. There's no people in the waiting room allowed, nothing like that. And they assured me that that hospital was doing the best that it possibly could with the situation, and it didn't matter which hospital I went to in New Orleans, it would be the same thing, that they all have COVID patients. Right. So that's as much as information as I could get out of them, but I could not visually confirm sick people or an entire ward of sick people.
Right. And why do you think they would be hiding that information? I mean, doesn't the public have a right to know, right? I mean, we're being reported on all the numbers and everything day in, day out. Why would they try to contain that? What are they hiding?
News. That was one of the first things they did. You've been watching the news, right? And I said, yes, but the numbers I'm hearing are all over the place. So I was just trying to get a little more accurate data from actually being there in person. And they seemed to like that, actually, that I was taking the initiative, but I didn't get anything that I could share with anybody.
Still none of your business, right? I wish I could answer this more based on direct experience because I don't go anywhere near a hospital as a doctor or a patient. So, I really don't know. I do have some contacts in New Jersey. I know they have some patients in the hospital who allegedly are ill with this illness. But, I don't know what to make of that because that would be true every year, that there would be people in the hospital with pneumonia and some of them would be in the intensive care unit. I mean, in my experience in the intensive care unit, and if it's a medical intensive care unit, like half of the patients there have pneumonia. because the ventilator is the main thing that would put you in the intensive care unit. And if your pneumonia is bad, that's what you're going to need. So, I'm not sure how to say that this is really different. I certainly have seen some news coverage that appears as if they are making it look like it's really crowded, and this is kind of strange, because I saw this video of it, supposedly an overwhelmed emergency department in Queens, New York, and they actually showed this ER, and I was looking at it and I'm like, it looked actually quieter than a typical Friday night. I was just perplexed. I mean, I've definitely been in situations where there was a major thing going on, or a shutdown of certain types of hospital beds, or just the hospitals were all full and people get backed up in the ER, and where there'd be like beds all lining the hallway with people in the hallway because there's no rooms to put them in. And you have to step around these people. And it's a really unpleasant situation. And it was just nothing like that in this film. So it was very dramatic, because they had this refrigerated truck behind the hospital, or they said it was a refrigerated truck. They didn't show you the inside, but they said that's where they're basically putting the dead bodies, because I guess their morgue ran out of capacity or something. But there were no personnel there. There was no activity. So it's hard to tell what's going on. I know Richie has actually had he's left us now, but he's had a lot of coverage about this. A lot of people have sent him, video footage and stuff from around the world. And there have been like these testing facilities in like a hangar at an airport, and they've been just completely evacuated. So it's really strange. I also know that the hospital beds that are not for this pandemic illness seem to be all open. Like there's nobody in the hospitals right now, which is really a strange thing, because I'm sure there are people getting sick. There's always people sick. So why are the hospitals so empty? I just I'm not really sure how to explain that.
I want to remind people that Iran is releasing photos that you can see from space of burial sites for COVID-19 patients. And if anyone understands how propaganda works, you would see very clearly that is a very rich taste flavor to it that makes you think, oh my God, it's so bad that you can see the burial pits from space. So there is a lot of misinformation that is being intermingled with the actual information. And it's becoming so much more difficult for all of us as researchers who just simply want people to know what's going on, to find out and trace these down. We end up having to do what Jason's doing and physically go to places and ask, can you tell me what's happening? And I've got those reports. I've got dozens of reports of people saying, yeah, I work in this hospital. We're slow. In fact, people aren't here because everyone's stuck at home. They're like, well, I'm not going to go to the hospital. There's no way,
Yeah.
I just want to point that out. This is not a rumor. This is everywhere across the board. You're seeing these similar kind of reports. So,
And at the same time, I see the mayor of New York brings in the comfort ship, right? And he's saying that they're going to have to increase the number of hospital beds by 3 times, right? So it doesn't. Also, are the numbers increasing because they're just making it up, or is it from the testing?
mm-hmm.
Well,
Like you said.
there was a man in Washington who was reported as dead in Florida, and then he's like, I'm right here, I'm fine. So we know that they're lying about who dies and how they die. We know that there's family members who have said, yeah, my dad died or my aunt died or whatever, but not from this. Like they had a heart attack, or people die and they're being reported as COVID patients. But I also, think it's possible that actually people are being affected by something they dumped in the ocean for those dolphins or whatever. It's possible we have some toxin that is being added to our environment, and it's possible that it hasn't been added to every environment yet. And so it worries me that we would, I wouldn't want to dismiss that there's a possibility that something is going to happen and that they're warning us about it and that it's coming. And so I know that if vitamin C is effective and that's something we all have access to, then maybe we should all consider stocking up on vitamin C and being really, really healthy for a while. Because if these things are cumulative, or your body is heavy metal toxicity maybe, and that's going to make you more prone to whatever this additional toxin might be, or I just think it's a good idea to take care of ourselves.
Right.
Absolutely. And I've been actually recommending that you stay in a state of as good a health as possible, clean up your diet, increase your bowel movements, take trace mineral supplements. Actually, it's those two things of increasing your bowel flow and the trace mineral supplements are going to provide good protection against any heavy metals. There, certainly there are other things that if you get sick that you can do. And actually, I was planning to put out an episode talking about how you can treat upper respiratory illness using natural means, so that if people, do get ill, whether it be a cold, the flu, or some kind of toxic exposure, essentially they're all the same, and the principles would be the same. So definitely the case, drink enough water. I recommend 1 quart per 60 pounds body weight, and I recommend distilled or reverse osmosis, but as clean as you can get the water is definitely better than just drinking tap or bottled water. And that will certainly make you more resistant to any illness. And I do agree that that's a strong possibility, Lindsay, especially because of the way that this seems to be just going from one discrete geographic area or cluster to another.
Mhm.
And of course, it's really easy to say that that's due to contagion, and they really need the contagion in order to quarantine us, because if there's no contagion, then there's absolutely no reason for a quarantine. But if you applied something to the water supply in a major city, everyone would be exposed to it, and you'd have everyone getting sick. And it would appear as if it was a contagion. Same thing. I mean, I think another possibility may be due to the spraying from geoengineering that
Exactly.
could be putting toxins on us. And once again, that would be, they'd spray over an area, and you and all your neighbors would be affected, and it would seem as if you're passing it between each other, but that's not the case.
And it would also account for this thing that they're saying, which is that it comes back again in some people. And it's like, well, it would come back again if you poison them again with stratospheric aerosol injection or other.
Because they're still breathing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that gives you an ability to manipulate this thing and drag it out for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, generally the thought is if this were really a virus, that you would get ill, then you would be immune and you would be resistant, right? And they get around this with the influenza story, because they say that, it mutates every year or whatever. And they could make that story for COVID as well, but then they would have to wait till the next season. But if they do this strategy that, well, no, there's, for some reason it evades your immune system, so you can't be impervious to it, and you can get it again, well, then they can give you another insult and they can drag it on. Absolutely.
So if the respiratory issues seem to be the worst thing that's going on, is there anything that one can do to help with that, to help prevent some sort of respiratory condition?
Yeah, well, like I was saying, the best thing that you can do is to maintain as healthy of a state as you can, and that means eating clean, nutritious food, avoiding processed food, eating whole foods, eating organic foods, drinking clean water, drinking enough clean water, taking your trace mineral supplements, having some things on hand for increased detox, and increasing your bowel flow to help just keep leaching the toxins and dumping them out of your body so that they don't accumulate and put you in a vulnerable state. But it's also important to maintain your psychological health. And that's really, really hard right now with the social distancing, because you need to have contact with other people, including physical contact, right? You need affection and human contact and interaction in order to stay mentally healthy.
Mhm.
You need to consider getting out in nature. I think that is going to be something very, very helpful to keep you grounded and in touch with what is real and what is not. And be good to just walk or hike or get your blood circulating, get yourself moving. That is really important to keep you healthy. And I know that it's hard and that we're all have some degree of fear because it seems that our lives are never going to be the same after this for a variety of reasons. Many people are scared of getting sick and dying, and a lot of people are scared of financial ruin. People are scared of losing their civil liberties.
Mhm.
So it's important to experience and utilize that fear in a positive way. In other words, don't let it take control of you. Don't let it paralyze you, because then you're basically a sitting duck for anything bad that is going to come. But harness that fear as a source of energy, as a source of motivation to take action, to do what you need. I mean, at the minimum, at least take care of yourself and your family, and keep yourself healthy. But also, learn about what's going on. Look at your own information, do your own research, try and make your own decisions. Don't just, believe the mainstream media. Of course, don't believe all of the people around you who are really afraid. Decide for yourself, and you'll have a much better experience, and you'll get through this. At the other end, you'll be in a much better place if you take that kind of approach.
Andy, the government is recommending that parents not hug their children.
God.
Could you respond to that as it pertains to our immune system and what that might do? Does that sound safe to you? Or are you not hugging your children, or have you implemented that policy?
Absolutely not. I couldn't imagine that. I mean, that you'd have to physically restrain me to prevent me from being affectionate with my family and children. And in fact, I will shake anyone's hand when I'm still working now because I'm a medical person, and I work at a place where people reside and need a certain type of care. And when I meet with people there, I offer my hand. Not everyone takes it, but mostly they do, actually, because they, see with their own eyes that people are not sick and dropping like flies. I know that I've made some people uncomfortable in certain circumstances because I am not good at keeping my mouth shut about certain things. And there's certain obvious contradictions in these precautions. So, for example, as a treat, I went to the bagel place yesterday to get my kids some bagels for breakfast. And I walked into the establishment, and you couldn't go up to the counter where the cash register is. They had this put all the tables as a barrier. And, you had to order, and they would come to you and stuff. And I'm thinking about that, what's the purpose of that? Because they have people back there. We don't know if they're sick or healthy or what. And they're preparing food and distributing it to dozens and, scores of people. And they're breathing on the food. They might be coughing and sneezing. I mean, we know, if you go into a restaurant and do a chemical test looking for fecal matter, you find it everywhere, right? So all their secretions and stuff are getting all over all the food. So if we have to take all these precautions, well, how the hell can we do that? It just doesn't make any sense at all. And when I pointed that out, I just got a real weird look, and then the woman just walked away and went about her business. But I did notice that the gentleman who was behind me, who had just come in, as soon as he ordered, he went outside, and there were, by the time I got my order, there were about 5 or 6 people all standing outside, afraid to go near me.
So just to clarify this, because I want to understand if we're not supposed to touch our children, it sounds like that would actually be detrimental to their immune system. And if we're telling everyone who owns a business that they have to shut down and not fulfill their obligations to their own family, that would also hurt their immune system. And if we're destroying the economy for the next month by shutting every single possible thing down and bottlenecking everyone to go get their food in a central location, whether it be through a grocery store or this cattle prodding way into a restaurant, that would also endanger our immune system. And I just can't help but ask, if you have an antigen or a pathogen that's attempting to attack your immune system in 3 unique ways, wouldn't that be a definition of the traditional virus, of something that's actually trying to attack your system and cause damage to it?
Well, you certainly could think about it that way. And you know that I have a sort of different understanding of the immune system, and I don't like to talk about this in terms of a warfare model of disease where, our defenses are down and we're going to be vulnerable to attack. However, that being said, you absolutely, we are social animals. We need to have social interactions, and especially with our family unit, in order to serve our purpose on this planet and in this world, and in order to remain healthy. And if we are kept in isolation, there are dire consequences for our health. I mean, in fact, this has actually been looked at in some studies where people had, certain types of unique experiences where they were isolated for a prolonged period of time. Now, certainly, this has also been looked at in a penitentiary type of situation as well, where people are purposely isolated because they're considered so dangerous or they're being punished for something. But I'm talking about like someone who might try to sail around the world by themselves in a sailboat, right? And it would take months. There's interesting accounts from some of these people, and it's essentially they're vulnerable to totally cracking up and going crazy, and it's because of the lack of contact with other people. So if we obey all of this, I mean, gosh, to avoid your own family is it's just incredible to even have the thought of that being a possibility, and it would be awful. I mean, my kids would be so upset by that. Emotionally, they would go into a depression.
There's also studies that show that dementia increases when we're in isolation and have no human contact, and that our mental state obviously diminishes in that place. And then I'm also concerned about the impact on mental health, not only of this whole fear campaign and this obsession with the fear that we are nonstop being pummeled with, but also the economic downturn is shown to increase suicide, and we're purposely, forcing the economy to have a downturn. So even if we don't see deaths from, coronavirus like we might be expecting, we'll definitely see more deaths from that. And no one seems concerned about that. And that seems like a huge issue to me that we're avoiding. Why trade one death for another,
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think there are so many consequences of these financial policies. But yeah, suicide is a very important one to look at. I mean, we all have heard stories about the Great Depression when there were, bankers jumping out the window of skyscrapers. Interestingly, there's in social science research, there are several clusters or epidemics of suicide that they describe as actually being contagious through some sort of empathic mechanism, perhaps. So yeah, this is definitely something that I guarantee that we're going to see some increase in suicide as a result of this financial ruin that people are experiencing. I mean, I can't imagine really any small business owner virtually who has enough capital in reserves to sustain not having revenue for a month or two. I mean, most of these small businesses are operating on a very thin margin, and they have to keep going to keep things afloat, and they're all going to become employees in the future of some multinational conglomerate corporation, and that is going to have a huge detriment on their lifestyle and cause all sorts of strife.
What is it the socialists and communists say? It's for the greater good.
Yeah.
Who's greater good, though?
Exactly.
Not mine.
Yeah, blockchain will be instrumental in this process as we vacate small businesses and they become owned by fictional corporations. It's definitely this is a huge hit to the economy, and no one is really able to talk about it because obviously the health of someone is so much more important than their economic outlook. But we're just simply not able to see the forest for the trees of not only what's happened, but what they are actively doing to us right now. Those people who don't have jobs will also have no income, which means everyone else that does have a job is not going to be able to make money off those people because those people don't have money. So this, to me, looks like a very systemic attack against the immune system of our economy, against our livelihoods. And I hear what you're saying, Andy, about it not being looked at that way, but that's what I see happening right now. And anyway, it's kind of off topic because this is more about the science and the medicine behind this, but it's definitely something that I'm gravely concerned about. This is why I'm so glad that all of you were here today to discuss this. So
Well, I'll tell you, James, after, I mean, obviously I'm spending a lot of time trying to keep up with what's going on in the pandemic situation, because that's, where I can really get the information out to people and maybe understand things at a slightly different level because of my background. But after that, the second area I'm spending as much time as possible is trying to figure out what's going on with the financial situation and how I can protect my family and myself from the devastation, and see in my community, are there people I can help? Like I tell you, I would love for someone to open up their business, and I would definitely be a patron, and I would be dying to go there and support whoever's going to do that.
They'd be really heroes. Those would be the heroes right now. The ones that would step out and say, no, I need us all to be healthy. Therefore, I'm going to open my doors. It's the only thing I can do to help right now. So I just want to say, hands down, those are the heroes right now, is the people that are willing to do that. And we should honor that and be grateful for those people that are willing to stick their necks out to do that. So.
Absolutely. So on that vein, I want to give a shout out to my kids' piano teacher, because every other parent is, of course, afraid to bring their kids. And so they're doing their piano lessons over Skype. But she is still welcoming my kids into her home. And, if she's not going to, I think I might be skipping the lesson, but I think she understands. And, so thank you, Julie, for doing that, because it really means a lot, and it's very brave and important of you.
Yeah, I got to shout out to Dunn's Deli, man. Thank you guys. You're still like, James, come on in, man. Let's have some food. Let's talk about it. Give me a hug. So thank you so much for being there, guys. This is so important. You're the front lines now, because I've called out to lawyers. They're not listening. I've called out to many in the medical industry, and Dr. Kaufman has stepped forward. But most of the people are not listening. Most of the people are simply socially distancing themselves from everybody. And what we need right now is opposite. We need heroes. We need an immune response to the land. We are the immune system of the land, I think, right now. And our reasoning and our level-headedness is crucial at this point right now. So anyone out there standing up, have some plasma prana from all of us. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Amen.
Social distancing sounds like social engineering to me.
It absolutely is. It was like within one day, all of a sudden, everyone I knew was saying social distancing, and same with a couple of the other buzz phrases that we've had. It's like whatever mechanism they have to control people's minds has been tuned up and turned on extra high lately, because people are just responding so quickly to whatever programming they receive.
Yeah, it seems like this virus is the cherry on top of decades or maybe even centuries of social engineering and indoctrination. And with the media, how they cover shootings and tragedies and stuff, it's a well-oiled machine. Everybody's already been conditioned for that. So it's just, yeah. And like you said, James, we're the leaders now.
Mm-hmm.
I've been saying that. We're no longer the weird conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
But even then, people that I've talked to over the years, some people just still don't see it, and not everybody's going to. But I want to just mention one thing that, and Jan Irvin a couple of years ago, and some people have a little problems with him, but I think he's a really good researcher. And he was doing some research on Salem and the Puritans. And I think now that those MP3s are maybe in his archives, but I'll go back and listen to those. But he was saying that the Puritans weren't Christian; they were the Purine that had come over from Europe, and that were associated with the Black Plagues and maybe with the smallpox and stuff like that over here. And it was the ones like that group, Cotton Mather, and the Huxleys were in that group, and they were also the ones that started the universities. So that's why that stuck in my mind. If assuming that's true, which it seemed to be, his research seemed pretty sound. That those families, those entities are still behind the scenes. So with everything I was seeing, it just made sense that was that this was going to happen. And you may have seen Freeman did a show in 2008 titled "They Need a Pandemic," and he's not the only one. Joseph Farrell in 2010 was saying it. So we've seen this coming. It's just I don't know how. Well, you know what, too? Watching one of the news feeds today, I was looking at the chat room, and so many people are like, fake this and parasites. And so people
Wow.
know. I'm just wondering what's going to break the whole news cycle and all the governors and that whole agenda. Because I hope that we have a large enough uprising voice that the other just kind of goes away if we turn our back on it. I just don't want. I want to reduce the conflict, and but I'm very happy to be here, and we'll get this out more and more.
Well, I want to add on to what Steve just said, that Dr. Paul Offit, one of the heads of CDC, literally said on camera, the best way to sell vaccines is to have a global pandemic. That's a marketing tactic that they've adopted, that they understand that the only way we're going to get everybody to jab this aluminum into their arm is if we have a massive pandemic. And there was not one person on that stage that disagreed. They were all nodding, going, yes, indeed, this is the only way it's going to happen. So
Sound marketing.
Yeah, and Christians have heard for years about the taking the chip or the mark of the beast or something. They should be the first ones to not be going along with it. But there's something else. I lost it, but go ahead.
Well, I can add something to this conversation because I have my ears in the vaccine community. And there actually are quite a number of people from a Christian bent in that community. So, it's not enough, certainly, Steve, but they're certainly represented there. And there's planning, and there is a lot of concern in that community right now about exactly what you're talking about. And I think if there's anything that can really mobilize people and wake them up to this, I think it's that. But, James and I have talked about this, and there's so much fear of this illness that, how many people are going to just be ready to voluntarily roll up their sleeve and take this? And if they make it voluntary, I think from point of view of, Empire planning this, it would be a better strategy, because if you force it right away, I think that's where the biggest likelihood of real resistance coming. Just a few days ago, Anthony Fauci, who is the the director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Immunology, and is I believe the head of the COVID-19 task force for the White House. You always see him right next to Trump, and they never observe any social distancing, of course. And he put an editorial in the New England Journal that said that, oh yeah, well, actually it's really just like a seasonal flu, and the mortality is probably be around 0.1% or 1 in 1,000 cases. And only one, actually no major outlets at all cover this. So it was in the New England Journal, where some doctors read that still. I certainly found it, but like WND was the World News Daily or something. That was the only outlet that I could find any actual news coverage. So, I wonder if that is just a disclosure and suppression, but if, because it's been from several countries, like the Italian government put out a thing basically saying that only really sick people die from this and no healthy people are at risk. The United Kingdom put out a report downgrading the level of the epidemic there, basically to a category that wouldn't require any special measures at all. Yet they're still continuing the measures. So I just don't think that these pieces of information have made it out to the general public in any way, and certainly no one is taking it seriously outside of our community here.
Yep. Humanity is not a virus, and they're trying to sell that it is, and it's going to take courage. It's going to take courage. You're going to make people mad when you try and tell them, hey, here's what's going on. Check out this film. This is a board certified MIT Duke doctor. Look at it. Ask your doctor, hey, what's an exosome? Just ask him. Just see what he says. Now, then compare the two. You'll start to understand what this job entails. You're going to have to make a sacrifice of people being angry at you. They're going to offload their fear onto you. Take it and realize this is a gift. I can use this to spread this word more. This is my fuel. This is my gasoline. We have to percolate information. Truth will come from the soil up. Propaganda will come from the tower down. And right now we need to percolate this information. And thank you guys so much for being here and putting this energy into it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Can I drag this back to preventative maintenance and the helping respiratory illnesses? It's my understanding that one of the biggest problems with this illness, whatever you want to call it, is that it switches your immune system from an internal to an external immune and dumps all of its power into that. So like for somebody that would typically use plant medicine, like today, elderberry is one of the most popular things out there, you know, with going with the trends. One of the problems that, from my understanding of it, is that then elderberry is also jacking up that side of the immune system, which is what's causing some of the more serious cases of this and the more severe symptoms. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I don't really subscribe to that model of disease that explains it that way. So essentially, I think that that rationale is a bit of poppycock. My understanding of what the immune system truly does is that it's basically like your body's coordinating system. It handles all the organizational matters of coordinating different systems in your body. And one of the main functions is to remove toxins from the body. And there's quite a bit of a coordination required for that. And I think that the exosomes play a major signaling pathway to recruit those immune system cells to come and address that issue. My understanding, and I really don't know a lot about elderberry syrup per se. I know that lots of people are definitely talking about it. But what I find is that in the natural medicine space, that essentially the majority of people are still working under the germ theory model, which is really the paradigm of allopathic medicine. And so I think what people think, and I don't know specifically about elderberry syrup, but other things like a lot of people are trying to use colloidal silver or nano silver as also a remedy for that. And it really just perpetuates the warfare paradigm that our body's being attacked and we have to attack back and destroy. And when they chose like the names for various cells in our immune system, they really adopted this paradigm in a big way. Like we have natural killer cells, right? It's just like that movie, Natural Born Killers, right? It's like we have psychopathic cells in our body, going out and murdering anything that's not us. And I don't think that the body really works that way. I think that the cells engulf any foreign cells that they don't recognize in order to figure out what they are and what and how they can either get them to the right place or get them out of the body if they may be harmful, but that it's not a militaristic combatant type of operation. It's more of an information and create barriers and obstacles and support type functions. So in my opinion, the most likely cause of all of these acute upper respiratory illnesses, other than some of them possibly being a natural biological renewal process, is that there is some kind of toxic exposure that damages the tissue. And essentially the illness is a response to purge that toxin out of the body and repair it to normal. And so like the interaction between the immune cells and the bacteria, I think I can sort of explain how it is not the immune system killing and getting rid of the bacteria, but the bacteria are nature's recyclers. And when we have damaged tissue, just like as you would observe, on the forest floor, when there's dead plant material or animal material, the microorganisms are there, and they actually come from within those dead plants and animals, and they decompose it so that the basic constituents like the minerals, the carbon, etc., can go back into the soil and be used by other organisms as a part of a renewal process in nature. And so the same thing happens in our bodies. So we have, let's say we have a strep throat type illness. Well, there's some damage that occurs to our throat, and then that's recognized and arrested. And then the body summons these microorganisms to come in and clean up the damaged tissue. Now, that process is, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And our immune system is the one saying when the job is done. So they may suck up and, engulf the bacteria when the job is done, so that they can restore the body back to the normal, healthy homeostasis. And sometimes actually that process is disrupted by other things, additional things, like perhaps heavy metals from vaccines, which are not a usual toxin that our body is used to getting rid of, because it really, in nature, there was nothing where aluminum would get into your body. We had to like go down into the earth and do a lot of fancy engineering and chemical processes in order to extract this aluminum out. So it's perplexing to the body, and it may, in these situations, may impair the immune system's ability to put an end to the recycling process, and the bacteria may keep going, and then may inadvertently, damage healthy tissue. But essentially, the job is basically for the immune system to say, well, okay, time to start the recycling. Now it's time to done. Let's get rid of them. You guys go back into your progenitor state so that you'll be ready to emerge the next time we need you, and then everything is back to normal.
The whole anti-vaccine movement was certainly picking up steam over the past few years. The one big thing I keep thinking is this could be used as a mass excuse to get everybody back on the vaccine train. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree that would be the intention, but I see a lot of resolve among the people who are resisting this. And I'm actually quite excited I'm not excited about this, but I'm excited to be talking about a remedy for this, for people who don't want to be subjected to any mandatory procedures. And this, by the way, even goes beyond vaccines, because there may be additional things that we're asked to do in a mandatory way. But, I know you have interviewed Cal Washington a couple of times, and he and I are collaborating now. And we are planning to do a talk later this week where we're going to lay out the details of this remedy legal strategy, which, by the way, works outside of the court system. So we don't have to, there are no lawyers involved. This is on a higher jurisdiction, sort of under God's law in a way. And so we're going to, describe that to people and try to make it accessible and tell people how they can get the documents and basically join this collaborated effort. And I feel that if a critical threshold of people take this approach, we could really take out this mandatory vaccine effort completely.
Sounds
At
great.
least.
Sounds great. Guys, I don't want to end this. I just want to suggest that if we did end it now, it would be under 2 hours, which I think would have a better flavor for it when people see it. But I certainly don't want to end anyone's conversation. How about we do this? Does anyone have any comments directly about Andy's presentation itself? Because what we want to do is help him humanize that. No offense, Andy, but what I mean is take out
no.
50 words and make it easier to convey. I found it to be as followable as someone like me would be able to. So that's why I only asked the things I did. It was specific to that. And I just want to give everyone else an opportunity maybe to do the same thing now.
My questions were also geared towards that when I asked them. So I have no additional feedback.
Did you guys? I mean, I know that you're all very sophisticated, but did you understand the main arguments that I was making in the presentation? It was
Absolutely.
clear to everybody.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yep. And my follow-up questions were like a direct reflection of, so as I understand it.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're getting at, James.
I don't remember for sure if your final conclusion was sort of the review of the main points. So if not, that would be good. And if it was, then excellent.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it was.
Okay.
I apologize for missing most of it. I live in the West Coast and did not catch that it was 1 o'clock Eastern.
Oh,
That's
I
my
know.
fault, man. I'm sorry. I told you one like we live right beside each other because I feel like
Yeah.
you're next to me.
Yeah, no, so I apologize for missing it, and I fully understand. This is a struggle. I dance a lot more into the occult world and in plant biology. So most of these things work. Everything works the same. Plant biology is the same as human biology. They have this same with it. So I wish I'd been there for the majority of the presentation.
Well, I got a recording cooking here, and as soon as we hit stop, I'm going to make that available. If anyone does see this, you have my permission to share this with anyone you want. Does anyone
Yes.
listening on the panel object to anyone else sharing this information with anyone else? This is a good time to speak up.
Nope.
So,
Feel free. Share, please share. I feel like some people don't realize that most people sharing things want you to share those things with others.
Right. That's right. So this is the official, we are granting permission and Godspeed to all that. I want to send some massive prana to Andy, man. Just,
Yes.
freaking knocked it out of the park, dude. I've been so moved by what you've been doing. It means a lot to all of us. Thank you so much, man. I'm so glad that you've spoken up when others wouldn't. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
well, I really appreciate that, and I just hope that people can wrap their head around this, and I want to do whatever I can to try and reverse this situation.
Well,
I don't want this going where it's going.
You are, man. You are, my friend. You definitely are.
Yes.
All right, guys, I'm going to hit stop record right now. Thank you all for being here.